Teen relationships and realities. Yeah.
Hello there, everyone, and welcome to our third live stream broadcast with Bishop Paul. I'm Father Jacob Van Sickle, and here with me is Vladika. Our title today is Teen Realities Relationships. So I'm going to turn it over to His Grace Bishop Paul.
Good evening, everybody. Here, Bishop Paul here. I was thinking the last time I did this with you at 7 o'clock Central, it was daylight out. Now it's dark, and this is kind of like the time of the year I don't like because the days are getting shorter. But then my worst day of the year and best day of the year is when winter begins because that's the shortest day. But I know the next day the days will start getting longer. So anyways, it is kind of strange looking out the window and seeing that it's dark now. Well, anyways, we're here tonight to talk about the issue of relationships, teen relationships, and the realities that go with that. And as I said in my reflection on Tuesday, this is really a broad stroke of the brush. There are so many issues that we can talk about. The two that come to my mind today that maybe we can touch upon are, first of all, the issue of the influence of modern technology on our teens, particularly in relationships. And secondly, to talk some about the issue of the fact that for kids that are going to public school, they're exposed to so many things at very young ages. Children being sexually active, maybe as early as 13. And my big worry as a bishop is trying to address that when many of our teens might feel, what's the problem with having sex outside of marriage? And I know this is something you as parents struggle with too, so we're going to get into that, hopefully. But I first want to talk about this issue of modern technology and its impact on our teens. I've read an article recently about how these big tech industries like Apple, Google, all these applications that are now created really have an intentional design to persuade and influence people's thinking. And I really worry about how that influences our kids that are kind of like they gravitate to these instruments to the point that I imagine it's very difficult for parents to try and set limits on the use of the iPhone, use of the various instant messaging apps that we have today, to the point that kids, there's almost like a sense of an addiction to them. And I think this is a serious thing because we spend so much of our time in life as adults, but even as kids, looking at a screen, looking at an iPhone. And we're talking to each other, we're texting, but we're not really touching each other. We're not meeting face to face. Now, I don't want to say that all this stuff is evil or anything like that. God has given it to us for a good use. And so the challenge for us, I think, as people is how do we teach our kids to make good use of these applications in such a way that it does not create the sense of what I perceive to be an addiction to them. And, this is a toughie. I think it's not a matter of what you just do at 13, 14, and 15, but I have to wonder, do you really have to look at an earlier age? How early do we start exposing our kids to this stuff? These things. If they're texting and if they're using their iPhones at 7, 8 years old, do they really need to be doing that? Because these habits are not formed at 13 or 14 or 15. I imagine they must have their root in a younger age. And I think I often I think about the fact that it was only in the late 90s we used to get along fine without any of these things, and now we seem to foster a dependency on them to the point that kids and even adults, but especially for our teens, are they spending too much time on their iPhone? Are they spending too much time on the computer screen? And in that sense, um, I think that becomes a real concern that we have to address in our family life. And how do we set some moderate limits on the use of these devices? Um, and I think a few months ago, I remembered um, speaking in one of my reflections about needing to have some guidelines during fasting periods for the use of the modern technologies that we have, because I think of the dependency they do foster. And so I guess my words to you as your bishop and trying to offer some constructive advice is to sit down with your kids and how can you find a way to um, not be possessed by these things, but to use them for good, to use them for appropriate communication and minimize, to avoid habits that lead to any kind of over attachment to them. And so I think this is really important because it affects the way our kids relate to the world around us. If we spend too much time on the screen and not enough with person to person contact, I think that can be a problem. I think devices and these modern technologies, whether it be Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, they offer venues for communication, which is fine, but and to make friends. But I think after a while, how do we get this relationship that's on a computer screen into a relationship in real life that's face-to-face dialogue? And I think that's what we have to strive for. It's very important that we walk in that direction so that people are not spending all this time behind the screen, because it impacts on the way our teens view their relationships with their friends. They're based on what you look at on a screen and not on seeing the person face to face. So that's my introductory thoughts, and I don't know if any questions are coming in, or Father Jacob, you'd like to offer any thoughts.
Well, I just would like to again invite everyone to type in their questions. It sounds like, from what I am hearing in the chat, that people are hearing us okay and seeing us okay, which is wonderful. I don't know, Vladik, as we were talking the other day, I don't have teenagers yet, and so I guess I'm trying not to think about these things, but worrying, of course, how just because of how different things are today than they were when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and I want to reiterate that again, I don't want to come across as saying these things are evil. They're not. I mean, God has allowed them into our midst to be used for good reasons. And the thing that worries me is reading articles and a recent story on 60 Minutes about the use of persuasive psychology, that a lot of these major companies like Apple and Google are consciously developing applications to engage in the practice of persuasive psychology to influence kid behavior. And sometimes maybe that persuasive psychology may not be good because they want you to get them to buy your product and to make a profit at it. There's a business motive on their part. Are they really thinking what's best for the kid? Or are they trying to do things that are going to get you to buy their product so they can make money? And so I do worry about the influence this has on kids. And I think we need to find a way to deal with this. And I think I remember having a conversation with a parent where, maybe it was in this article I read too, where the parent was very frustrated in this article because in terms of trying to set any limits on the use of these devices, their own child rebelled and kind of said, they were mad. They just wanted their phone back. And it was really almost like an addictive kind of form of behavior. I remember years ago, I've told the story, but I was once watching in the 90s a Today Show piece about a man who back then tried to get by during the holiday break without using his cell phone or his mobile phone before we even had the iPhone. and to try and go without it for a week. And he quit after 2 days because he couldn't live without it. And it just makes me think we did fine without them 30 years ago. We didn't need them. And so this concerns me as a bishop, and I don't know. So I'm looking to hear from you if you have any comments or any thoughts that I could speak to.
Yeah, so Christian says that he's, the first thing that he tries is simply to set an example and not himself be constantly on the phone or on the computer. Although even that, he says, is hard as an adult. He needs it for work. But I don't know, I wonder myself, with little kids even, who want to be on devices all the time. I'm not so sure how much they looked at me for an example, but that's at least, it is something. I just don't know how valuable. Yeah.
Well, I know kids are getting exposed to this stuff quite early, even before 5 years old. They're being exposed to the use of some kind of keyboarding, video screening, and so it is a way of life today. I don't know how we escape that. This is part of what it means to be living in this age. So I'm not going to be helpful if I just say, let's go back to the time when we didn't have these things. That's not going to happen. We need to work on finding the good that these things offer. And the only thing I can offer Christians is the thought that maybe, like on Wednesdays and Fridays, as part of a fast, we need to observe. Not using only these devices for particular specific reasons. If it involves doing your job, if it involves communicating events that are happening, but maybe we shouldn't be using them for social communication on those days. We should take a fast from that. Why don't you speak to your friend on the phone directly? Why don't you go visit them instead of talking to them on an iPhone through texting or through Snapchat or Instagram or whatever? We need to have more person-to-person communication, face-to-face communication. So I would say one guideline that maybe we could try and observe as families is use these devices to communicate necessary information. If you're using your devices to do your work, that's understandable. But to have social conversations and to say you can't be friends with anybody unless you can use your iPhone or your computer, well, that's not true. We can find other ways to communicate with our friends. And I really want to advocate for more direct communication where we're either talking on the phone to them or we're seeing them face to face. I think that's important. So perhaps on Wednesdays and Fridays we can find ways to curtail the use of some of these communications. And of course during Great Lent, maybe we can find a way to observe this. I don't know. That's more difficult. Maybe during Great Lent we say no use of social communications after 7 o'clock in the evening. Things like that. I think there's no guidelines. You can't look to the Lenten Triodian to give you guidelines of the use of modern technology. So, but I will have to say, the use of these things really produce a craving and a desire in us. It's a passion. And one of the things we try and do in Lent is curb these passions for things that run amok in our lives. And so I remember Bishop Callisto Square once writing about Lent and how by fasting there could be a great joy in receiving a boiled egg at Easter and eating it with gratitude and thanksgiving. Well, I think that's the same goal with a lot of this stuff. It's not to kind of say they're evil and we need to take them away from our kids, but to help instill in them a sense of gratitude for these gifts that have been given to us by God. And they're not something we're to demand by right. And we really have a sense of entitlement today in our country where we feel we deserve this. It's our right to have this. Because somebody else has it, I have to have it. And I'm sure the peer pressure is very important here that plays a role in this. So
we're getting a lot of ideas or questions about setting boundaries. So yeah. It's interesting, so you've begun by suggesting boundaries, Vladika, that are that are parallel to the kinds of fasting practices that the church has. But some are asking about, for instance, setting time limits. How many hours per day on the device. How whether one parent says that they try and get their kids only to interact with people online that they already know in real life. Whereas another parent, Erin, says that she seems to her that some of her children, it's hard to say, one or maybe her child, has made very healthy and worthwhile relationships. Maybe with people, it's not clear, I don't know, people that maybe are not close enough to hand to see in real life. So.
Well, I think as with anything, I mean, when you look at trying to figure out limits, I mean, there's a time for everything in the course of a day. I mean, is there time to give it a rest? I mean, you come home from school. I have to ask the question, how many of our kids need to take their iPhones to school? How necessary is it for them to be in school with their iPhones? I imagine if there's some kind of emergency, you need to have them, but this is where I'm out of sync. I'm 65. I'm an old coot. I mean, I'm not in with this stuff, so please forgive me, but I don't know what the reality is for parents and kids in school. Do they have their iPhones? Are they allowed to have them? Do schools have restrictions on use of iPhones during classes? Personally, from this old codger like me, I'm thinking, why do you need to have your phones during school? But that's easy to say. That's one thought I have. And I don't know if you as parents can get away with this if this is very prominent with kids in school. The other thought I have is, again, maybe every day, do you have a guideline that at a certain time the computer stuff and the iPhone stuff stops? And this is not a problem just for kids. I think I said in one of my reflections, often when I go to the airport in the morning for early flights on my visits, I'll get at the airport at 5 o'clock in the morning because I have a flight like at 7 a.m. And what amazes me is seeing the number of adults that are glued to their iPhones doing work that early in the morning. And I'm going, what's so important at this time of the morning? But then again, they may be talking to someone in India, so they may be doing business. But I don't know what to say. I know texting is a wonderful technology. It's a great help. I enjoy using it for communicating simple messages, but personally as a bishop, I will not use email, Facebook, my texting to do any personal communication about questions on the faith. I won't do that. I mean, I want to talk to people directly. If they have a question, I'd rather answer it. I don't want to do anything where I get into writing my opinions on Facebook particularly, because lots of trouble happens there. As you can see, when we try and talk about any difficult issues, our country is very polarized. And so I think that becomes a concern. I mean, that's where the danger of using the computer screen, it's not the same when you talk face to face. So anyways, I don't know if I'm giving any practical guidance or not, but those are some thoughts I have.
Yeah, David has a really good comment, I think. He says, if we teach our children to be real with others, whether online or in person, then they'll do a better job using online relationships. Goes back to making your yes, yes, and your no, no.
Mm-hmm.
Amen. I think the reality is again, Vladika, we were just talking the other day, and it seems to me that when I'm on Facebook and I see all the posts, a lot of what you see is people trying to present an image of themselves that isn't genuine. And I think that, again, especially when kids are young, there's all the more pressure to appear a certain way, to fit in, to a certain group, and it really, social media is almost designed for that, for you to pretend you're someone that you're not,
Really? Okay. Well, yeah. I don't know. I do think the fasting opportunities in our cycles do give this wonderful way of addressing this. And the only thing I can say during the 2 week fast, the Dormition fast, the Peter and Paul fast, the Advent fast, and the Great Fast, you're dealing with 40 days. So I don't know. Maybe I can give some more thought into issuing maybe some guidelines for people to consider. But also, I think you just need to talk to your parish priest because you're better connected to them than you are to me. But I think some sort of an observance of fasting from some of these devices for part of the fast is a good thing to do. And I don't know, do during the 40-day fast, do you do a cold turkey, not using them at all on Wednesday and Friday? Do you observe a rule of maybe after 6 o'clock in the evening, you don't use them? I mean, this is new ground. There's no rule of thumb here. There's no canons we can turn to help us make sense of this. But I do think if we can enter into the spirit of fasting with the idea of helping to get a handle on our passions, where the need for these devices are not running us, but we're using them for good reasons and we're in control of their use, that's the aim of the fasting, is to check that part of us that tends to be dominated by the use of these things. And that's the goal. So everything is in moderation. I mean, that's the thing that St. Paul was known for saying, and I want to reiterate the fact that these are good things that God has given us to use for the proper reasons.
Yeah, Alex and Christian have I think their comment is almost it's what you were saying earlier, Vladika, that they're passions that they provoke in us, and they become addictions. But when children are on devices a lot, Alex says their behavior towards each other deteriorates. When we take them away, their behavior improves. I would say I see the same thing in my kids, not just devices, but with television or with video games or anything like. And I remember myself as a kid with video games, it was that way,
For those of you people who like watching Star Trek: The Next Generation, I remember there was a plot in one of the shows in the 80s that had these people wearing these things around their eyes, and it kind of like got them addicted and entranced, and you couldn't take it away from them. And every time now when I think of people staring at their iPhones, I think of that Star Trek Next Generation plot. And to show you that Star Trek has always been ahead of its time in warning people about the issue of technology and how it can consume us and take over our lives. So I do think of that plot line. Even goes back to the 60s when the guy got on to defend Captain Kirk because he was being prosecuted for killing somebody and his witness was a computer. And then this whole thing was about books, that we're getting rid of our books and relying on a computer screen. This is back in 1967. So Gene Roddenberry had some vision about him, and it was... it's amazing with the things they dealt with in those shows and how forward-looking they were.
Modern day Hezekiah.
Right. Yeah. So, anyways.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of comments, Ladika.
I want to hear them.
Questions. Let's see. Well, Aaron again says it's hard to limit time on the screen when the schools expect them to have them and are even giving them to do their work on. So your idea of what if we made Wednesday and Friday a fast day? Well, what if your kid comes home and has homework to do on their iPod?
So tell me. So in other words, the school gives kids computers to work on.
Oh yeah, my kids are in elementary school, and even our youngest in kindergarten has been given a laptop that he brings home one day a week. The other kids bring theirs home every day.
Okay, that's all new to me. Tell me about that some more. Of what that's.
Well, I mean, I would say for them, they're real young, and so there were a lot of controls on the devices. They can't get on things like Facebook or they can't do any social media on those.
Yeah.
But I think I used to teach part-time at a high school when I lived in Cleveland, and there the students were given devices, and there weren't those same kinds of restrictions put on them. Mm-hmm. I think they had some safeware to prevent pornography and that sort of thing.
Yeah, right.
But they were free to be on the social media, and they were on it a lot unless you were really strict as a teacher making sure it wasn't out. And, yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, I think, are they bringing back cursive writing, penmanship? Because how many people know how to write anymore?
I don't know.
Because we're typing on a screen.
Right.
And penmanship has kind of suffered. You know, I don't know. I'm sounding my age. I'm sorry, guys. I'm 65. I know. Forgive me. Aaron, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, that's why I understand the reality of the school aspect. You may not be able to control that, but you have control over your home environment. And so again, I would only encourage you, they use the computer to do their homework, but how can we find a way to just say after 7 o'clock, guys, turn it off?
But
You know?
I'm wondering, Vladika, you've said several times now that it is a blessing in some ways,
Yeah.
right? And we shouldn't condemn it. Is there a way to guide our kids in how to use it well? You know, and not just by saying, well, you can use it so many hours a day, or you can use it these hours a day, not, but like when you're on it, I don't know.
Well, I think that's where there has to be discussion with what are they using it for, and is it to chat with friends? But how do you then intervene? When's too much too much? I mean, you can have a discussion with your kids about that. At what point is the device being used too much for social chatting? And you have to weigh that against how is that affecting the way the kids view their relationships. I mean, when it's exclusively face to face and texting, and writing to each other on the Instagrams and everything, where's the person to person contact?
Mm-hmm.
And I would have to say, as a guideline, when that's lost and it doesn't exist, that has to be addressed. You know, and maybe that's where, when is too much too much? Communicating, hey, let's get together. There's something going on Saturday night at school. Yeah, I want to go. Okay, let's go. You know what I mean? That's social conversation, but you're communicating necessary information in an efficient way that is far more easier to do than doing something physical or sending a letter or calling. But at some point, that has to find another way of being referred to, a more of a face-to-face relationship again. I want to get back to that. And when you say guidelines, I think it's kind of like, how do we teach our kids? Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. What are legitimate uses for these, and when does it get too far? And I can only weigh that by to what extent, if you do without it, there's a sense of I can't live without it. I think that's why I think there's got to be periods where you don't go without it to see how am I doing with this. You know, how we use the famous words from Chrysostom: do you live to eat, or do you eat to live? You know, do you live to eat, or do you eat to live? It's the same thing. You know, you can ask those same questions to examine the issue of your passions and how do they get out of hand. I don't know.
Yeah.
So my point in bringing up some guidelines, I'm not saying for a total ban or anything, but maybe through the days there could be times or periods that the devices are off. You know, and that will go for anything. You know, it gets back to the family meal. I don't know how often families have meals together because of the other activities going on with families in life, but to be together to enjoy a meal, to shut off the devices, now all families are different on that. Some families don't talk together too much. Some have barn burning conversations where there's cultural issues and all that. So not all families, there's no kind of ideal of how we chat together at our meals, but to have a meal together without the distraction of these different devices and everything is a good thing to do. You know.
Alex says that his kids are watching, and he wants you to answer for them.
Oh, okay.
What to do about the peer pressure. Specifically, he says, our children have many non-Orthodox friends. They seem to be chatting and texting all the time and very late into the night. then we strict parents tell them to put the phone away.
Mm-hmm.
So what should they tell their children when their kids are saying, but wait, all my friends are doing it and I'm being left out and you can't take this away from me?
Well, Alex, I want to talk. You want me? I'm talking to your kids now. I think what's important here is, just because somebody else does it doesn't mean that's what's best. I don't know. I mean, I think the tough thing about living the Christian life is it's not a popularity contest, and I don't think people should be deprived from talking to their friends, but I think there is a place to say, no, it's too late. We just we need to stop. I don't know. The peer pressure, I don't know how to deal with that in terms of just, I don't know where that means in terms of bullying or people start giving somebody a hard time if they stop their texting. I don't know. That's
Seems to me a lot like, when I was a kid, on the weekends I had to be home by 11 when I was in high school. But a lot of my friends could stay out till 1 or 2 in the morning, right?
Well, I mean, everybody has. Yeah, I don't know how. The reality is I think to go on endlessly without curtailing it is not good. Because it's feeding an appetite, and then that appetite is then controlling you. And then you don't have the self-control to say no, and the reasons why we have limits is to teach children how to say no. And that maybe they can internalize these norms for themselves as they get older. So, I don't know, that would be the whole point of understanding why we say no to certain things, to teach us habits of self-control is the most important thing. That we command the instruments and the instruments don't command us.
Mm-hmm.
Boils down to that.
A couple of watchers, Jennifer and David, are sort of saying, well, Jennifer says, what about what we're doing right now? This is in some ways kind of face-to-face and person-to-person, but it's online.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So is it, I don't know, how does it count? She says, some of my teens' friends are long distance, and this is how they communicate.
Well, I would only say that we're doing this 1 hour, maybe a little over an hour every 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
We're not talking for 4 hours.
Right.
So you know what I mean? Everything, there's a good in this. There's a good in being able to communicate with each other, for me to connect with the diocese. This is a big reason why I wanted to do this, because this offers people in the diocese to get to know me, and for me to kind of hear what's on their mind. But as you can see, I'm not going to be doing this. I'm not doing this every night or every week. We'll do another one in 5-6 weeks. Okay? I mean, so I kind of feel like we're honoring the good use of this device and we're not letting it control us. So I feel that's the difference.
Yeah. Well, and Skyping or whatever it is, obviously this is kind of a one-way thing, but that doesn't seem to be any different than like talking to somebody on the phone,
Oh, I mean, I Skype. I mean, there's so many things we can do today. And during the course of my week, I have meetings, WebEx meetings, where we bring people from the deanery together to talk, where we have our pastoral department of the OCA, we have WebEx meetings and we talk. These are very important forms of communication that make it easier in the sense of not having to travel anywhere. I mean, I'm going to be doing this live stream. We're going to have this youth live stream on November 16th, where I'm going to be able to connect with youth in 6 places in the diocese. And we're going to talk to each other about I am Orthodox, and what are the challenges, what are the struggles, what are the joys. And we're going to have this opportunity to dialogue with each other, with me talking to our kids in 5 different locations throughout the diocese. I think that's fantastic. Because you know what? Trying to bring kids together in one location when it's a non-camp setting is not easy to do because of the reality of life. And so, but again, we're not doing that, all the time. We do that once a year. We've been doing that once a year. So I think that's really different, you know. And this is the goodness of the use of some of these modern vehicles where we can try and connect with one another in a way that's more cost effective for people, doesn't put a drain on their finances. They don't have to pay for their kids to go somewhere to one location in the diocese, in a diocese that's so big. So that's the advantage I see in some of this. This is a good use of the technology.
Yeah. Yeah, Eric has come in. He probably wasn't here earlier, but I was bringing up the fact that the devices and the apps are designed to be addictive.
Mm-hmm.
But that's different, right? From just talking to somebody is different from using an app like Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat or one of these other things, which isn't just straightforward communication, but is in ways like designed to sort of suck you in so that you spend a lot of time there, not just to communicate to one person something you need to communicate with, but it's like a place to be all the time.
Well,
right?
and our own president
and feel like
tweets.
You're connected.
Our own president's on Twitter. I mean, I'm like, what? I mean, I don't know. He's not helping himself on Twitter. Forgive me. I mean, I don't want to get political, but I think, I didn't vote for either candidate, but I mean, this is where I'm going, why is this needed? I mean, in some ways, I don't know. Sorry,
Yeah.
I think I lost my train of thought there.
Well, Aaron really appreciates the idea of fasting from devices and is going to implement it. Christy, to sort of change
Well, the only thing I would only
go ahead.
say to encourage, do it in small steps. I mean, I once gave an example about trying to introduce a new form of fasting to people. I'm kind of heavy right now. If I wanted to really be serious about losing weight and I wanted to run, even though I don't think that would be the way I would do it, I wouldn't go out there and try and run 3 miles. I might run or walk, and I may build up to that. So my only encouragement in terms of implementing fasting rules, do it small in the beginning and work on experiencing success with that, and then build on it over time. That's it. Okay, sorry.
Christy says, to kind of get off the topic of the technology, can you give some other advice for helping us parents to raise teenagers in this world when so many of their friends are not Christian? How do we encourage them?
Wow. Well, and I think that is a big issue. I mean, that kind of goes to the very core of, this is the wide stroke of the brush on teen relationships. And I think the important thing that I've said in some of my reflections that we need to encourage our kids to see is, no matter who they are, if they're Orthodox, not Orthodox, even if they're atheist, even if they're gay, even if whatever. I mean, we're all born and made in God's image and likeness, and the things we need to encourage our kids is not to look at, how can I put this? We need to see Christ in everybody we relate to. And so part of friendships means just loving people where they're at. That doesn't mean you have to approve of what they're doing, but I'm going to work on this more in some of my future weekly notes. St. Paul says we're not called to judge those outside the church. So we don't need to hit them with any kind of sense of approval or disapproval of how they live their lives. We need to share the love of Christ with everybody and see the person of Christ in that person, and not let their differing belief systems somehow become like an obstacle. Now, don't get me wrong, there's, to a certain extent, if you're not on the same page, I don't know how much intimacy you can have and closeness. The fact that that people do things that may be different from what our kids believe in, you only go so far. But kindness, love, gentleness, all these things can be expressed in these relationships to be friends as much as it's possible. Not hold it against them. I remember I often make this comment, and I have this personal issue with tattoos. And, to see everybody just draped with all kinds of tattoos on them, my reaction is very nonverbal. I go, oh, and I want to move away. And I think that's what I mean. That's not good to do that. We need to kind of not look at that and let that become a source of division. I think we need to find a way and just love and not kind of, I don't know, I've used this word, and my favorite word is putting a scarlet letter on people and pinning them. Oh, you're this kind of person. Oh, you're that kind of person. No, you're somebody made in God's image and likeness. And you know what? We're all on a journey to try and be whole and complete. Even as Orthodox Christians, we're in a hospital in which we're trying to get better, trying to grow further into God's image and likeness, and to grow in the fullness of Christ and mature in Christ. So we can never approach anybody that we know in school or in our neighborhoods with this idea that somehow, because we have this, somehow, I don't want to say we're better than them, but because we're mindful of our own sins, teach us to be more compassionate and patient towards others. So how do we teach our kids to do that? Well, I think you try and model that in the way we as adults relate to people around us. I don't know. I said it on my note last Tuesday. Sometimes I think our kids do better jobs of making friends with people that don't have the same viewpoint than us adults. Maybe sometimes I think we're more conflicted about that. Maybe, I don't know. So,
Yeah. This is something that I struggle with even without having teens, just kids that, like for instance, and this is not as big a deal as some of the other more hot button issues, but my kids have made close friends with a family down the street where there's a boy and then two girls that are sisters, and both their parents have been divorced, right? But now they're living together as a family, but they're not married, right?
Right,
the parents
exactly.
aren't married.
Yeah, sure.
And, the kids have a great time together, and they're wonderful kids, and so we don't have any trouble with it. I'm just sort of waiting for the day when my kids start to ask me about that, and how I should explain it to them in a way that at once makes clear that we believe what we believe for a reason, right? That it's not just, oh, well, this is just the way we are, right?
Sure.
But that they then shouldn't look at those people and condemn them either, right? 'Cause it's a very hard balance.
I know,
I think,
of course
to strike.
it is. Yeah, of course it is. And I think I'm going to pick up on this in my notes. In my last Tuesday note, I ended it with this quote from St. Paul from Corinthians about not judging those outside the church, but St. Paul was called to judge those within the church. And so that's a very interesting statement. And so what ramifications does that have for those who are not in the Orthodox Church that we're called to relate to? We're not called to withdraw from them, because as St. Paul says in Corinthians, then you would have to leave the world. But we're called to be in the world, but not of it, as we hear. That tension must always exist in the Christian life. And so I'm not answering your question because that's a toughie. How do we explain this? It goes to the very core of, I think we have to, it starts with the understanding of what it means, first of all, that God became man. I think everything has its start in the incarnation. And this whole idea that Christ is an image of what it means to be the perfect human being. But in some ways, we look to his mother, the Virgin Mary, as being the image of what it means to be saved by her son. And you have this male and feminine attributes. And I think when we look at marriage, I love those words of St. Paul in that marriage epistle that we read from Ephesians, in which many people complain about as being sexist. But after he talks about the woman being obedient to the husband and the husband loving their wives as Christ loved the church, he says something very powerful. I'm talking about a mystery here. Christ and the church, I think he says. I'm talking about a mystery. Christ and the church. Christ being the bride, the church being the bridegroom. And so this image of union coming together in this wonderful love that is eternal. I mean, in the marriage service, we take the first walk, this eternal walk, as we sing those hymns, Rejoice, O Isaiah. We honor, we talk about the martyrs. We don't talk about, oh, a man and woman have found each other and love each other. They're coming together in the common witness of Christ, and they're walking this circle that has no beginning and no end. And so in that sense, when we talk about why take like sex belongs in marriage, I think it's a witness to this union between man and woman that is an icon of Christ's love for the church of coming together. And, when you think about all these, the big problem, which I wanted to speak some today about this, is the issue of sexual activity. The kids are sexually active at such a young age without any sense of feeling that it's a sin anymore. And haven't read any statistics or research on this, and I may be wrong, but it's my impression that this is pretty common and prominent. And I just keep on thinking, the more kids have sexual relations with one another before marriage, you know what? That becomes a living memory that's put in them. And then how can that impact on them to want to have a serious relationship with just one person when they've been involved with too many sexual partners? There's a movie I would encourage all of you to watch with Matthew McConaughey and Jennifer Gardner called Ghost of Girlfriends Past. And it's a take on the Ebenezer Scrooge story, a Christmas story in which Matthew McConaughey is this playboy that can't find any serious relationship. And it's a story of how he, in this crazy world of Hollywood, but he gets redeemed and finally finds his true love. But there's a wonderful scene in which he's exposed to all these girls he's gone to bed with. And they're surrounding him and they're being crowded. They're all crowding him. That's the memory. When you go into a relationship with a woman, you're not just relating to that woman. You're bringing all the women that you've been intimate with. And yet, you're bringing that into the relationship, and it makes it very difficult then to live a life. That's why I think the idea of marriage between a man and a woman is a good thing that we need to stand up for in the church. Now, everything's possible with God. I'm not going to sit here and say, well, because men and women live together before marriage, there's no hope for them. No, that's not true. But it does become an issue. I think the church is wise in her teaching on this. It's just we live in an age with such sexual permissiveness. I know it's very difficult. I don't know. I have great sympathy for couples that go through this and struggle with living the faith, for priests that have to work with couples and people in marriage to address these issues. They're not easy to deal with today. So I don't know where I'm going with this. I kind of went on a rabbit trail, so I'm sorry, guys. I'm trying to explain this issue of all that, why that's important. And we do the best we can with the grace God gives us. And we always approach everybody in this world always being mindful of our own sins first. We can't approach people with any sense of self-righteousness. I think the gospel reading today, the epistle reading of St. Paul, glorying in his weaknesses, boasting in his weaknesses because he found strength through doing that. Because we only conquer in this world not by our own self-reliance, but by looking to Christ to complete and fulfill what is lacking in us. And that's the only foundation we can have as Christians if we're going to engage this world.
Alex says, Amen.
Amen. Oh, okay.
Yeah, so, sorry, there were more comments and questions sort of
Please.
further back, but
Yeah.
I was too enthralled listening to Ludika.
You're too kind.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, well, let's see. Going back, David. Well, somebody, I forget who it was now, but had asked whether, you would address, and you did just now a little bit, but the topic of your reflection. Um,
Well, you mean last Tuesday?
yeah, this past Tuesday's
Well,
reflection.
I mean, I think one of the things I kind of, as I said, I want to talk about teen relationships or realities, but there's so many facets, and one of the things I first picked was the LBGTQ phenomenon. And what amazes me about that is, I'm sure this has all been going on a while, but that acronym only has kind of come on the scene in the last 5 years. Where did it come from? And as I said on my note, I'm struck by the fact that I wonder if this is really that big of a population in the school system. I think it's quite small, but then I read somewhere that somebody said this is a big fad. A lot of teens think it's kind of cool. I don't know. Again, this is what I hear from people.
Yeah.
But my own thinking on this is it gets back to the core issue of somebody that raised earlier about how we teach our kids to relate to people that don't share our faith. And I said in my note, I mean, I don't think it's a bad thing that kids have friends that are transgender or gay. I mean, what I mean by friends, there's different levels of friendship. I mean, there's acquaintances, there's the ability to relate spontaneously. But, friendship is the deep thing. I mean, because Christ said, I no longer call you servants, I call you friends. There was something intimate there and something close and real. So, friendship has to be different levels. What I'm trying to get at here is if we're going to get anywhere with some of these issues, we can only conquer them through love. And you don't go up to somebody who's not in the Orthodox Church and say, well, because you're this, there's something wrong with you. I mean, that's not the approach to take. I think you have to be kind, you have to be compassionate. Now, should they ever want to come into the church, that becomes something for the priest to deal with regarding how do you catechize, how do you address this issue. And because this is a new thing, I mean, I know there's people out there that feel maybe the church should just, allow. Why are we making such a big deal about the fact that somebody's transgender? Why should we be making a big deal about the fact that somebody's gay? I mean, I don't know. I don't think the church, well, it's not that somebody, again, it gets back to what you do. It's not necessarily what you are. I don't think we have the attitude in the church that there may be people that have attractions to somebody of the same sex. We would not try and say that's not true. But we do have an approach about how that should be dealt with if somebody wants to come into the fullness of the church and to further grow in Christ. And we deal with that pastorally then. But I think for the people that are going to school, that are not Orthodox, that don't share what the church teaches, that's why I get back to what St. Paul said. We're not called to judge those outside the church. And so it seems to me that frees us up to love them where they're at. And to at least have some kind of, if it's possible, to have a friendship with them. And that's where I got into the other side of the story, because I imagine I'm getting into trouble with some people who might say, so what if you have somebody that's John that used to be Gene? Do you call them John? Do you call them Gene? How do you deal with it? Simple things like that. If somebody who's transgender now wants to be called Gene when they were John, by calling them Gene, am I kind of sanctioning that? Or am I just kind of respecting that's who they are and what they want to be called? I don't have to endorse what they're doing. But it gets back to these kind of questions about how do we relate to people, especially when they're not Orthodox? Do we just have nothing to do with them? Well, then that gets back to the St. Paul, I mean, well, if we had nothing to do, we would have to leave the world. I mean, his quote was to talk about those in the church. So I don't know. I mean, I think we need to find a way where we can express God's love in these circumstances that sees Christ in everybody that we relate to. what did Saint Seraphim say? He'd see people and say that they were his joy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, um, anybody. We need to find a way to express that kind of love, because you know what? If we, and that's where I get back to, if we start hanging scarlet letters on them, we have got nothing to offer in our witness.
Yeah, yeah. Christian says, getting back to, I think, one of the first reflections you wrote for the website, Ladika, but thinking about Jesus with the tax collectors and sinners, he says.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it occurs to me when I talk to people in the parish, about these issues, I feel like there's a lot of misconception among our people, but it comes from the world for sure, because they think that when you say you're going to love somebody, that means like just affirm everything that they think they want to do, right? Like that's what it means to love.
Well, I talked about acceptance in my earlier reflection, because anything we do has to be based on the sound foundation of what acceptance means. And I remember in my early reflections I said, if we don't get this, we won't be able to deal with these other issues that we're talking about now. Jesus never saw somebody he related to as not being a sinner. He didn't say, it doesn't matter what you do, I love you anyways.
Right.
He ate with sinners and tax collectors, and he said, the healthy don't need a physician, the sick do. So he had an understanding there was something not right about their life, but that did not present an obstacle to him to relating to them and having compassion on them and being willing to relate to them and spend time with them. Now, I don't know how many of these tax collectors and sinners repented and found Christ, but he still related to them. He still ate with them, because only the sick have a need for the physician. I often joke with people, nobody ever goes to hospital. Maybe I've already said this before on the other chats, but nobody ever shows up at a hospital and says, well, I just want to take a vacation, I'm feeling fine, let me just stay here for 2 weeks. No. Somebody goes to a hospital because something isn't right. So, So I think from that viewpoint, in my early reflections, I tried to say that Jesus took people where they were at, but he also wanted to take them on a journey. He also wanted to sell all you have, come follow me, and have treasure in heaven. So you just stay. I'm going to stay with you, and just, you just keep on doing what you're doing. It doesn't matter. It mattered enough to him to go to a cross and die for everybody. Yeah, to fix what was broken in us.
Well, Ladika, it's 7:58.
Okay.
We've come up to our hour. I have to apologize if I didn't get to everybody's question. I think I tried to catch all the questions. I might have missed one. We had a lot of interactions in the chat, and I know I didn't touch on everybody's comments, not even close. But thank you, everyone, for your participation.
We can announce that I think we don't have a date for the next chat, but I think the next topic will be, why can't church be more fun? Because this is something we've been talking about in our editorial board. And this may be more, I guess it's true for a lot of kids, but I'm sure as adults maybe sometimes wonder, why can't church be more fun? But that's a loaded question. We need to maybe talk about that a little more. But I'm sure it's something. Who was it somebody in our meeting said that, was it Adam, when we met on our board meeting, that we just sit and stare in church? One of his kids told him that.
That's right.
We just sit and stare at church. So I'm often stand and stare. Yeah. And I often kind of said, when we do our liturgies, I basically read out of a black book, the liturgy book. We do the same service. So we need that's an interesting way of standing and staring. So.
So that'll be the topic next time.
Right.
Dealing with kids in church and making
sure.
it. Helping them to engage, and maybe helping us to engage if we're also struggling. All right, and we're looking at probably a date in December. You said, right?
No,
Early
well, let
December.
me see. I got to look at my schedule. I'm hoping we do something in November.
Okay,
Okay.
very good.
All
Well,
right.
again, thanks you everyone for
God bless you all, and
coming
please forgive me if my shortcomings have come out, but I do the best I can with the grace God has given me, and I hope you're finding these chats and the live streams helpful. I look forward to doing this. I really look forward to being able to do this when we do set them up. So, God willing, we'll see you again in another 5, 6 weeks.
on. All right. Good
Thank
night,
you. Good
everyone.
night, everybody. The Lord's blessing be upon you.